In the early 80s, I lived in Okinawa, Japan, a world away from the familiar comforts of home. My dad, a military man, believed dragging my brother and me across the globe would toughen us up, mold us into better men. And in a way, he was right. The military life opened my eyes to cultures most people only dream of glimpsing. I'm grateful for it. All of it. Even the moments that still claw at the edges of my sleep. When we arrived in Okinawa, Dad didn't want us cocooned on base, surrounded by American voices and chain-link fences. He craved immersion, so he plunked us down in a small Japanese neighborhood perched atop a monstrous hill. Our little house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, gazing out over a sprawling zoo, monkey shrieks echoing up the slope, and on one side, a vast, looming cemetery. The house itself teetered above the monkey habitats, a mile downhill through a tangle of jungle straight out of an Indiana Jones fever dream. Thick, suffocating vines, buzzing with unseen insects, hid the ground beneath. The neighborhood kids and I hacked through it endlessly, shrugging off whispered warnings about venomous habu snakes and unexploded World War II mines, their rusting husks supposedly still buried in the soil. We were invincible, until we weren't. We were the only American family in that cul-de-sac, encircled by Japanese neighbors who welcomed us with a warmth I'll never forget. The kids adored us. Language was a flimsy barrier. We spoke through gestures, laughter, and the universal chaos of childhood. Across from our house lived an older couple, their property swallowed by a lush, almost otherworldly garden. The woman insisted we call her Mama San. She'd lure us over with steaming green tea and chocolate banana cookies, her hands gnarled but gentle as she guided us through weeding or planting. We adored her. Everyone in that neighborhood radiated kindness, except for one shadow that clung to Mama San's home like a curse. Her garden backed right up to that cemetery, its stone crypts glaring down at us from the valley below. Okinawa's an island, so the earth doesn't swallow its dead. Instead, they're sealed in above-ground crypts, massive, polished stone arcs crowning wide slabs, each with a hollow square carved into the center. Coffins slide into those dark mouths, then get capped with another slab, leaving a shallow ledge for offerings. Yen coins glinting in the sun, wilting flowers, incense curling smoke into the humid air. Below Mama San's house, the valley dipped low before clawing up into another hill, both slopes bristling with these crypts. Crumbling stone steps snaked through them, uneven and slick with moss, some so worn they seemed to dissolve into the earth. It was a haunting sight even in daylight, a silent city of the dead watching us. One evening, as the sky bruised purple, Mama San called me over alone. She said she had something to show me, something just for me as the older brother. Pride swelled in my chest, tinged with curiosity. I followed her through the garden, its flowers glowing faintly in the dusk, to a thick wooden bench carved with faded scenes of fishermen and samurai, their faces eerily lifelike in the dim light. She told me to sit, then vanished into her house, leaving me with the rustle of leaves and the distant hoots from the zoo below. She returned with a tray, hot green tea steaming in chipped cups, sweet rice cakes glistening like pale flesh. Sitting beside me, she smiled, her eyes crinkling as she murmured about the sunset's colors bleeding across the sky. But her voice soon dropped, heavy with intent. She'd seen me, my brother, and the other kids daring each other to brave the cemetery stairway. That path was a nightmare, hundreds of steps plunging down the hill, many cracked or missing, swallowed by overgrown bushes, the incline so steep it felt like the earth wanted to devour you. We'd made a game of it, who could creep farthest through the crypts at night, flashlights flickering, hearts pounding. Mama San's gaze darkened. She needed me to understand why that was a mistake, a fatal one. Her story began decades ago, during the war. Americans were demons in the eyes of the islanders, monsters conjured by propaganda to spur young men to fight and farmers to wield pitchforks beside them. But fear twisted deeper than duty. With nowhere to run, no sanctuary from the advancing enemy, hundreds of Okinawans, men, women, children, flung themselves off a cliff rather than face the horrors they'd been promised. Their bodies shattered on the rocks below, a sacrifice to escape torment. I froze, while rising in my throat. I hadn't known. Tears stung my eyes as the sky deepened from pink to a sickening crimson, like blood seeping through the clouds. Mama San squeezed my hand, her grip cold and firm. "Don't cry," she whispered. "The past is a lesson, not a chain. We remember so we don't return." But her story wasn't done. Among those who leapt was a young woman, clutching her two small children. She survived the fall, broken, unconscious, but alive. For months, she lay in a coma, a ghost hovering between worlds. When she awoke, the truth shredded her. Her children were gone, buried in an unmarked crypt somewhere in that cemetery below, lost among the nameless dead. Day and night, she roamed the crypts, her wails echoing through the valley, her hands clawing at stone until her nails splintered. Grief consumed her. One dawn, she staggered to the ocean's edge and hurled herself into its depths, desperate to join her lost babies. But peace eluded her. They say suicide damned her soul, trapping her in purgatory, an eternity of searching, never finding. The sun vanished as Mama-san spoke, the cemetery sinking into a void of black. Feeble lamps flickered along the main path, their light swallowed by the dark between the crypts. She still wanders, Mama-san said, her voice a hiss, looking for her children. You can hear her crying. She pointed down. I didn't want to look. Every nerve screamed at me to run, but my eyes betrayed me. There, in the cemetery's depths, a white shimmer pulsed, a figure, stark against the inky gloom. It trembled, swaying side to side as it drifted between the crypts, slow and deliberate. Then the sound hit me, a faint sob soft as a breeze, swelling into low guttural moans, pleas torn from a throat raw with anguish. My skin prickled, sweat beading cold on my neck. The figure grew sharper, its edges fraying like torn cloth, its movements jerky, unnatural. Was it closer now? The moans sharpened into a keening wail, slicing through the night. I lurched to my feet, heart hammering, but Mama-san's grip tightened. She won't come up here, she murmured, her voice eerily calm. We're too far. But down there, after dark, she waits. Many don't know her pain. They call her the White Witch, and it enrages her. She lashes out. Stay away. Pray for her instead. Her eyes glinted, unreadable. She visits me sometimes, hoping I'll guide her to peace. But she's lost, forever. The air thickened, heavy with something I couldn't name. The wails faded, but the figure lingered, a pale smear in the distance, watching. I never went near that cemetery again. Never sat on that bench with Mama-san either. Her tea turned bitter in my memory, her garden a trap I'd narrowly escaped. But the White Witch stayed with me. Years later, I visited Suicide Hill, now Peace Prayer Park, a quiet tribute to the dead. Tears streamed down my face as Japanese locals share their stories, their kindness overwhelming. I prayed there for all the souls, for forgiveness for her. I didn't deserve their warmth, but I soaked it in, humbled. Okinawa carved itself into my bones. I want to return someday to stand at that hill's edge and listen. Is she still there, drifting through the crypts, her cries threading the night? Or has she finally found them, her children, her rest? I don't know. But I hear her still, in the quiet moments, and I wonder if she hears me too. I was my dad's only child. Being a daughter, you'd assume a father would be protective. I get beat regularly, and much worse. When you're 6, you'll do what you have to in order to survive, because running away is not an option. I suppose I knew it was coming. It was Friday night, and once night had fallen, and it was only my mother and I. The dreaded routine of beatings and grasping at the straws of futility would only be a matter of time. Go, Lily. Go sit in the closet and wait for me. My mother was a Cuban immigrant with nothing but courage flowing through her veins. Still, I never understood at the time what a restraining order was, nor why it could so easily be broken. When the rumbling engine rang out and potent exhaust fumes began to flow through the vents, I could only recoil, because evasion was my only defense. Predicting the level of his rage depended on the force of the car door slamming, so when it audibly shattered the driver's side window, I knew it was worse than ever. My breath hitched. My tiny fingers clutched my shirt, knuckles white with tension. I tried to control it, but the shaking wouldn't stop. A child's fear is different from an adult's. There's no reasoning, no room for escape plans. It is primal, all-encompassing. It drowns you, wraps around your throat and squeezes. And so I stayed still, barely breathing, as I listened to the unmistakable sound of his boots dragging across the porch. Bang. The door frame splintered, and the doorknob rattled violently. Helena, you bitch. That door better be unlocked. I bit down on my lip until the taste of copper filled my mouth. My heart pounded so violently I swore he could hear it. The sound of my mother's body hitting the kitchen floor sent shockwaves through my spine. I focused on a tiny crack in the closet door, watching dust motes swirl in the dim light. Anything to distract me. But it wasn't enough. Not this time. Lily, baby daddy's home. Come out and daddy won't be mad. I tensed so hard my muscles ached. The floorboards creaked. He was moving, stumbling. A low growl of frustration echoed in the silence. Then 1, 2, 3, agonizingly slow steps up the staircase. My breath hitched in my throat. He was closer now. My body screamed at me to move, to run, but I was a prisoner in my own skin. 4, 5, almost there. Be a good girl and come out, he slurred, voice thick with malice. The closet suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Tears burned my eyes. My hands trembled, gripping my arms so tight I left half-moon indents in my skin. And then the step creaked. The broken one, the one that always gave away the moment before the horror truly began. Crash, then silence. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd turn back. Maybe the alcohol had finally taken him under. But then I heard it, the bathroom door creaking open. My stomach twisted into knots. Metal scraped against metal. The sound of the shower curtain ripping from its rings. No Lily there. Where could she be? I closed my eyes, willing myself to become nothing. To vanish into the walls, the floor, there. I knew how much worse it could get. I bore the marks of past lessons on my skin. My body trembled as his footsteps lurched back into the hallway. He was getting closer, his breath heavy, angry. Then silence. A heavy, unnatural silence. The kind that made your pulse drum in your ears, that filled your mouth with bile. Metal against wood. A bat. If baby girl's in the closet, come out wherever you are. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing for the worst. But then a sound I didn't expect. A dull, loud thwack, followed by a deep, guttural grunt. The vibration of something heavy slamming into the floor rattled through my bones. My father groaned, the sound thick and pained. And then nothing. I waited. Seconds stretched into eternity. The weight of fear still pressed on my chest, but something else seeped in confusion. Then the footsteps. Not his. Lighter. Steady. I peeled my eyes open, barely daring to breathe. And then there she was. My mother. Unharmed. Untouched. And at her feet, Dad's lifeless body, an axe embedded deep in his back. I gasped, my tiny frame trembling as I looked up at her in disbelief. She met my gaze, her own eyes fierce, unwavering. And then she spoke the sweetest words I would ever hear in my entire life. Mama found a good hiding spot, baby. Daddy's never gonna hurt you again. In 2003, I bought my first house, a modest 2-story fixer-upper with peeling paint and a sagging porch. I was ecstatic, practically vibrating with pride as I signed the papers and hauled my boxes through the creaky front door. It felt like a fresh start, a milestone. But that joy curdled fast. Just days after moving in, 2 neighbors, a middle-aged couple with sly grins, sidled up to me while I unpacked in the yard. "Seen the ghost yet?" they asked, chuckling. I laughed it off, playing along. "Oh yeah, he's real polite, holds the door for me," I quipped, thinking it was a small-town hazing ritual for the new guy. I didn't mind. I'd always been good at brushing off weirdness. But it didn't stop there. That summer, as I met more neighbors, the ghost talk kept creeping up, each mention a little less jokey, a little more hushed. Their eyes would dart to my house, then away, like it was staring back. I started to squirm. Finally, I cornered Mrs. Ellis, the elderly woman down the block who brought me a tin of homemade cookies when I moved in. She was kind, soft-spoken, with no-nonsense air. I knew she wouldn't mess with me. Over lemonade on her porch, I asked her straight, "What's with the ghost stuff?" Her face tightened, and she set her glass down slow, like she was weighing her words. She told me the previous owner, a woman named Claire, bought the place in the late 90s but never stayed a single night. Claire claimed something was wrong with it. Footsteps thudding through the halls at night, faint sobbing echoing from nowhere, and worst of all, glimpses of a man in the kitchen, slumped at the table, his shirt soaked red with blood that glistened wet in the dim light. Another neighbor, a burly guy named Tom, who'd helped renovate the place before I moved in, backed her up. He'd been hanging drywall in the living room when something invisible yanked his dreadlocks upward, hard enough to make him yelp. He quit the next day, left his tools behind. "I don't care what you believe," Mrs. Ellis said, her voice low. That house holds on to things. I'd had paranormal brushes before, shadows in my childhood bedroom, whispers I chalked up to nightmares. But that was years ago, buried under layers of skepticism. Still, her story gnawed at me. Then came the day I popped into the neighborhood video store, a cramped little shop with flickering fluorescent lights and stacks of dusty VHS tapes. I filled out a rental form, name, address, credit card, and slid it across the counter. The owner, a wiry woman with tired eyes, glanced at it and froze. "Oh my God," she whispered, "you live in that house?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked, voice tighter than I meant it to be. She leaned in, her breath sour with coffee. Her former employee, a guy named Daniel, had killed himself in my house back in '91. She'd raced over when she heard, but the police had already cordoned it off, yellow tape flapping in the wind. Daniel had just moved in with his partner, a quiet guy he'd loved fiercely. He called his mom that week, nervous but hopeful, wanting her to meet his partner and finally come out. This was the early '90s. Being gay could still get you shunned or worse. His mom already suspected, though. She'd seen the deed with two men's names. Over the phone, she spat venom, disowning him in a single, jagged breath. Days later, a letter arrived from an HIV clinic. Positive. Back then, that was a death knell. No treatment, no hope, just a slow march to the grave. Daniel unraveled. One morning, he sat at the kitchen table, poured a bowl of Cheerios, and ate in silence. Then he pressed a revolver to his temple and pulled the trigger. Blood sprayed the wall, the table, the half-empty bowl. The store owner shivered as she spoke. After that, weird stuff started here too. Tapes flying off shelves, some just hovering, like someone was holding them up. I'd hear him crying sometimes, late at night when I was closing up. She looked at me, pity in her eyes. Good luck. That night, I lay in bed, the house groaning around me, and listened. At first, it was just the usual settling creaks. Then I heard it, a faint crunch, like cereal spilling into a bowl. I don't eat cereal. My pulse quickened. A low sob followed, drifting up from the kitchen, raw and broken. I bolted upright, sheets tangling around my legs, and stared into the dark. It happened again the next night, and the next. Always the poor, always the weeping. Sleep became a battle. I'd wake to that sound, my room thick with a weight I couldn't shake. My grandmother's voice surfaced in my memory. When the dead come to you, they want something. Do charity in their name. Pray for them. I clung to that. One night, I dragged a chair to the kitchen table, lit a candle, and sat there, the flame twitching in the still air. "Daniel," I said, my voice trembling, "I'll pray for you. A novena every night till you're at peace." The first few nights were quiet, just the candle's softest. But on the 9th night of the St. Anthony Novena, patron of lost souls, the air turned sour, heavy with despair. Sobbing erupted, loud and unhinged, bouncing off the walls. Then came the breathing, ragged, hyperventilating gasps, like someone drowning in their own grief. I froze, my skin prickling, but I didn't run. It wasn't malice I felt, just a crushing sadness, a plea I couldn't ignore. 4:45 nights, I kept my promise. Candle lit, prayer whispered, a mass said in his name at the local church. Some mornings, I'd wake to a presence looming over my bed, a shadow I couldn't see but felt, heavy and mournful. Not evil, just lost. Once I swore I smelled Cheerios, stale, faintly sweet, lingering in the air. Another time, I found a kitchen chair pulled out, angled like someone had just stood up. The disturbances slowed after the mass, the sobbing fading to a murmur, the presence less insistent. But it never fully stopped. Even now, years later, he brushes against my life. A creak in the hall, a soft cry swallowed by the night, a fleeting wait at my bedside. I don't fear him anymore. I pity him, trapped in that moment, cereal bowl in hand, revolver gleaming. I wonder if he hears my prayers, if they reach him in whatever limbo he's caught in. I'll keep praying, though. For Daniel. For the house. For the piece of him it won't let go.